She didn't scream. She didn't collapse. She didn't even breathe wrong. When Emilio Varro turned away from her at that altar and whispered another woman's name, Serena Blake just stood there. Still. Silent. In $200,000 worth of lace and lies. The guests saw a woman being destroyed in real time. But Emilio? Emilio was watching her eyes. Not with guilt. Not with regret. With something far more terrifying. Relief. 6 minutes later, the ceremony was over. The other woman wore the ring. The cathedral erupted in applause. And Serena. Serena turned and walked out of that hall like she had been waiting for that exact moment her entire life. Nobody followed her. Nobody dared. Because every person in that room who truly understood who Emilio Varro was, knew that what just happened at that altar was not a betrayal. It was a warning. And Serena Blake was the only one who still didn't know what she had just been saved from. Or what was still coming. She wasn't supposed to be in his world. That was the first thing everyone said about Serena Blake. She was too bright for it. Too clean. Too untouched by the particular kind of darkness that clung to the Varro name like smoke to expensive silk. Serena was 26. A structural architect from Atlanta. The kind of woman who organized her week on Sunday evenings and believed deeply that the right plan, executed with precision, could solve almost anything. She had never been to Mexico City before the night she walked into the wrong fundraising gala. She had never tasted mezcal before Emilio Varro handed her a glass without asking. She had never been looked at like that before either. Like she was both the most dangerous and most fragile thing in the room. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. Not a question. Not a greeting. A fact. "Neither are you," she said back. And something moved behind his eyes. Something she would spend the next 6 months trying to name correctly. Emilio Varro was 31. Unmarried. Publicly, he ran the Varro Group, a conglomerate spanning real estate, private equity, and infrastructure contracts across Latin America. Privately, every government official in 3 countries owed him something they could not afford to repay. He was not the kind of man who attended galas for the food. He was not the kind of man who approached women he didn't already know everything about. That should have told Serena something. It didn't. Because he was also the kind of man who, when he smiled, made every other version of reality feel completely temporary. They talked for 4 hours. He walked her out at midnight. No entourage. No explanation. Just, "I'll see you again." Not a promise. A blueprint. And Serena, who organized her weeks on Sunday evenings and believed in precision planning, did not sleep that night. She kept replaying that last look. The one where he turned back before getting into his car. The one where he said nothing. Because somehow the silence said more than anything else in that room had managed to say all evening. She should have listened to the silence. She should have understood that Emilio Varro did not do anything without a reason. Not even smile. Not even look back. But she didn't know that yet. And he was counting on exactly that. He came back 3 days later. Not with flowers. Not with a call. He sent a car. And inside the car there was nothing except a single note with an address and a time written in his handwriting. No explanation. No pleas. Just an assumption that she would come. She told herself she wasn't going. She was already dressed when she told herself that. The restaurant was private. Closed to the public. The entire floor had been emptied except for one table near the window. The city glittered below like scattered diamonds on black velvet. And Emilio was already seated, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbow, reading something on his phone with the calm of a man who had never in his life worried about whether someone would show up for him. He looked up when she walked in. He didn't smile. He just folded his phone closed and said, "You wore the navy. Good choice." She stopped walking. "How did you know I was deciding between two dresses?" He said nothing. Just gestured toward the chair across from him. That should have been the moment she left. Instead, she sat down. Because there is a particular kind of man who makes you feel simultaneously terrified and completely seen, and the human heart, for reasons science has never adequately explained, tends to confuse that combination with something it calls love. They were 40 minutes into dinner when it happened. A man at the far end of the bar, well-dressed, unremarkable, the kind of face you would forget immediately, looked at Serena. Not the way men look at beautiful women. The way someone looks at something they have been waiting to confirm. He held her gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Then he picked up his phone, typed something without looking down, and left without finishing his drink. Emilio noticed. She saw it, the almost imperceptible shift in his posture. The way his hand moved 1 inch closer to the inside of his jacket before stopping. He redirected the conversation smoothly. Seamlessly. The way water redirects around stone, as though the stone was never there. Later, walking to the car, she said, "That man at the bar. Did you know him?" Emilio looked at her. "What man?" he said. Simple. Calm. Final. The subject was closed before it opened. She let it go. She filed it somewhere small and unnamed in the back of her mind. She should have opened that file immediately. Instead she got in the car. And over the next 8 weeks, Emilio Varro showed her only what he chose to show her. Weekend trips to Cartagena. Private gallery viewings in Madrid. Mornings in his penthouse kitchen where he cooked exactly one thing, scrambled eggs with too much butter, and handed her coffee before she asked. Small. Precise. Deliberate details. The kind that accumulate quietly inside a woman's chest until she realizes, one unremarkable Tuesday, that her whole emotional world has been rearranged without her consent. He never said "I love you." He said things like, "You think too fast. Slow down. No one in my world laughs like that. Don't stop. If you ever disappear on me, Serena, I will find you." She thought that was romantic. She should have heard it as the threat it was. The warnings came in different forms. She just didn't recognize them as warnings. The first came from his head of security, a man named Rios who had worked for the Varro family for 11 years and had eyes that looked like they had seen things no courtroom ever heard about. He pulled her aside one morning outside Emilio's compound and said, quietly, carefully, "Miss Blake. The people who love him don't tend to stay whole." She thought he meant emotionally. She smiled and said she could handle herself. Rios didn't smile back. The second warning came from a woman she met at a dinner party in Guadalajara. Beautiful. Composed. Wearing a green dress and a wedding ring that caught the light in a specific way that felt rehearsed. She leaned close to Serena over champagne and said, "You are not the first American girl he's brought into this circle. But you might be the last one he actually looks at." Serena asked what that meant. The woman was gone before she could answer. The third warning was Emilio himself. 3 months in. Late at night on his terrace. He said to her without turning around, "There are things about my life that would change how you see me. I need you to understand, some of those things are not choices. Some of them were written before I was born." She wrapped her arms around him from behind and said, "Then I'll learn to read a different language." He was quiet for a long time after that. Too long. And then, "You are either the bravest woman I've ever met, or the most dangerous." She laughed. He didn't. Because Emilio Varro had already made a decision by then. A decision that was going to cost her something she could never get back. He just hadn't told her what currency he was planning to use. The engagement happened 4 months in. No public announcement. No ring box on one knee. He placed a ring on her finger at breakfast one morning, custom, 7 carats, set in dark gold, and said, "You're mine now." Officially. She stared at the ring. She stared at him. She said yes, the only way Emilio's world accepted anything. Without hesitation. And somewhere in the Varro compound's lower levels, in a room Serena had never been invited into, a man she had never met received a phone call. He listened. He said, he chose the American girl. Interesting. Then he hung up. And the clock started ticking toward an altar Serena didn't know was already being prepared for her. The dress cost $220,000. Serena knew this because the designer told her personally, during the final fitting, in a tone that suggested she should feel grateful for being worthy of it. She stood in front of the mirror in the bridal suite of Emilio's private estate and looked at herself for a long time. Her skin was warm honey and liquid gold against the ivory fabric, luminous in a way that made the lace look like it had been commissioned specifically for the woman inside it, not the other way around. The kind of beauty that didn't ask for the room's attention. It simply took it. Ivory lace. Backless. Cathedral train that moved like water. She was marrying one of the most powerful and most dangerous men in the Western Hemisphere. And she was not afraid. That, in retrospect, was the most frightening thing of all. Her maid of honor, her college roommate Tanya, who had driven 12 hours from Dallas and spent the entire trip sending Serena increasingly frantic voice notes she refused to fully listen to, sat in the corner of the suite watching her with an expression that existed somewhere between awe and grief. "You look incredible," Tanya said. "But?" Serena said. "No but. Tanya. I just want you to be sure." Serena looked at her reflection one more time. The woman in that mirror had been through rooms that tried to dim her. Cities that tried to contain her. A world that had been quietly trying to erase her since the moment she walked into the wrong gala 6 months ago. She was still here. Still luminous. Still unbroken. "I've never been more sure of anything," she said. That was a lie. Not because she didn't love him. But because she had woken at 4 a.m. that morning with her heart hammering at something her subconscious had apparently already decoded. She dreamed about Rios. About the way he said, "The people who love him don't tend to stay whole." She dreamed she asked him what it meant. And in the dream he looked at her with those courtroom survivor eyes and said, "It means he already knows exactly what today will cost you." She had been awake since 4 a.m. She told no one. She put on the dress. She walked toward the cathedral. And somewhere across the estate, in a room she had never been invited into, Emilio Varro was already on the phone. His voice was low. Controlled. He said, "It has to be today." A pause. Then, "She cannot know. Not yet. Not until it's done." He hung up. He straightened his jacket. He looked at himself in the mirror with the expression of a man about to do the most painful thing of his entire life. And then he walked toward the altar. The cathedral was extraordinary. Gothic arches. Chandelier light like frozen gold. 600 guests in their finest. Flower arrangements flown in from 3 different countries that cost more than most people's annual salary. Serena walked down the aisle and the entire room stopped breathing. She was radiant. She was terrified in a way she had locked somewhere behind her sternum where no one could see it. She reached the altar. Emilio was already there. Black suit. No tie. Dark expression. Eyes that, when they found hers across the last 10 feet of distance between them, did not soften. They sharpened. She felt it in her spine. But she smiled anyway. She reached the altar. She stood beside him. The officiant began. And then a door opened at the side of the cathedral. The kind of door that isn't supposed to open during a ceremony. Murmurs. Movement. Heads turning. Emilio did not turn. He kept his eyes on Serena. But his jaw moved. Just once. A muscle she had learned to read in 6 months of loving him. The muscle he used when he was absorbing something he had already decided he wouldn't show. The officiant stopped speaking. Someone in the pews whispered, "Who is that?" Serena turned. A woman stood at the edge of the cathedral. Late 20s. Blonde. Poised. Dressed like she had been prepared for this moment long before today. Dressed in a wedding dress. Serena's blood turned to something cold and still. She looked at Emilio. He finally looked at her. He said nothing. He didn't have to. Because in that silence Serena Blake understood, not everything, but enough, that the wedding she was standing in was not the wedding she thought she was attending. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She stood at that altar in $220,000 of ivory lace and she held very, very still. The way a woman holds still when she understands that she is inside something enormous, and that moving incorrectly might shatter what's left of her dignity into pieces too small to recover. Emilio moved first. Not toward Serena. Away. He walked, slowly, deliberately, with the absolute calm of a man executing a plan, toward the woman who had entered from the side door. The woman who was also wearing white. The woman whose face Serena had never seen before in her life. He took the woman's hand. He did not look back. The officiant, after a moment of visible hesitation, resumed speaking. The room went silent in the particular way rooms go silent when 600 people simultaneously decide not to be the one to react first. Serena stood at the altar. Alone. And she did not move. Not because she was frozen. Because she was watching. Because somewhere in the architecture of the most humiliating moment of her life, something didn't fit. Emilio had not looked at that woman once. Not when he crossed the cathedral to reach her. Not when he took her hand. Not when the officiant began speaking. The entire ceremony, from first step to final vow. Emilio Varro looked at exactly one person. Serena. His eyes never left her face. Not with guilt. Not with apology. With something that looked terrifyingly close to vigil. Like a man watching to make sure someone survived something. When the vows ended and the room erupted in applause that sounded wrong, hollow, uncertain, like 600 people clapping because they didn't know what else to do, Serena turned slowly and walked out of the cathedral. Nobody stopped her. Nobody followed. Except Rios. Who appeared at her side as she reached the doors, silent as shadow, and said only, "Cars waiting, Miss Blake." She got in. She didn't ask where it was taking her. She just sat in the back seat of that black car and watched the cathedral disappear behind tinted glass. And she asked herself one question. Not who was that woman? Not why did he do this? Not how did I not see it? She asked herself. Why was he watching me like he was afraid I wouldn't survive it? The car took her to a safe house she didn't know existed. Not a hotel. Not an airport. A property. Private. Staffed by 4 people who clearly worked for Emilio and who clearly had been expecting her. There was food she didn't eat. A room she didn't sleep in. And a letter on the bedside table with her name on the front in his handwriting. She didn't open it. Not for 2 hours. She sat in the chair across from it and looked at it like it might detonate. When she finally opened it there were only 4 lines inside. What happened today was not about you. It was never about you. Everything you think you witnessed was exactly half of the truth. Stay where you are. I will explain what I can. Not all of it. But enough. She read it 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and set it back on the table. Her mind was running 2 tracks simultaneously. Track 1, He married another woman in front of 600 people with her standing 10 feet away in a wedding dress. That was real. That happened. Track 2, he watched her every second of it. Not with cruelty. With something adjacent to terror. Those two tracks did not belong in the same story. And yet here they were. She thought about the night on the terrace. There are things about my life that would change how you see me. Some of them are not choices. She thought about Rios. The people who love him don't tend to stay whole. She thought about the woman in Guadalajara. You might be the last one he actually looks at. Not the last one he loves. The last one he looks at. Why that specific distinction? Why that precise word, looks? She stood up. She walked to the window. Below the property, the city moved in its ordinary way. Oblivious. Indifferent. Unbothered by the private apocalypse taking place 4 floors above its streets. She said quietly, to nobody. What did I almost walk into? Not, what did he do to me? What did I almost walk into? Because something about those 4 lines on that paper had shifted the question entirely. And she wasn't yet sure if she was furious about that shift. Or grateful. He came at midnight. No knock. He had a key. He looked exactly as he had at the altar, black suit, no tie. But something had changed in the architecture of his face. The control was still there. But underneath it, something had been set down. Something heavy. He sat across from her at the small table near the window. He did not apologize. Emilio Varro did not apologize. She had learned this early. What he did instead was set a photograph on the table between them. She looked at it. It was a photograph of her. Taken from a distance. Long range. She was walking out of a coffee shop in Atlanta, months before the gala, months before him, months before any of this. She felt the cold start at the base of her skull and move downward. You knew who I was before the gala, she said. Not a question. He said nothing. Which was confirmation. How long, she asked. Long enough. Emilio. There is a man, he said, very carefully, who has been watching my world for 18 months. Waiting for a specific type of pressure point. He paused. He found you before I did. The cold reached her hands. What does that mean? It means the night of that gala, the night you walked into the wrong room, was not accidental. She stared at him. Someone placed you there, he said. Someone who knew that if a woman like you entered my orbit, I would not be able to leave you outside of it. A woman like me, she repeated. Visible. Luminous. Untouched by this world. He held her gaze. The perfect weapon. The room was very quiet. Weapon, she said. Against me, he said. Not by you. Through you. If you became mine publicly, you became leverage. A target. A door into everything I protect. She sat with that. Turned it over. She said, so today was the only way to remove the target, he said. She looked at the photograph still sitting between them. She looked at him. She said, very quietly, who did you marry? And something moved through his expression, fast, controlled, contained, that she had never seen on his face before. Something that looked like it cost him considerably more than the cathedral had. He said, that answer changes everything that comes after it. Tell me. He was quiet for a long time. Then, not yet. Emilio. Not yet, Serena. And in the silence that followed she understood that whatever the answer was, it was the half of the truth his letter had promised would never be fully delivered. She found out 3 things before morning. Not from him. From Rios, who appeared at 3 a.m. with coffee and the particular expression of a man who has been carrying a secret so long it has started to wear grooves into his face. The first thing. The woman from the cathedral, the one Emilio had married, had left the country within 2 hours of the ceremony. Private jet. No public record. Not a honeymoon. A disappearance. Serena sat with that. The second thing. The man Emilio had mentioned, the one watching his world for 18 months, had delivered a specific demand to the Varro organization 6 weeks before the wedding date. One condition. If that condition was not met by the date of the ceremony, Serena Blake would not survive the following month. She went very still. He was using me, she said. Yes, Rio said. To get to Emilio. Yes. And Emilio knew. He's known for 11 weeks. 11 weeks. She calculated. 11 weeks ago, Emilio had asked her what she wanted for their wedding breakfast. He had held her hand at dinner and said she was the most structurally sound person he had ever met, which, coming from him, was the closest thing to a declaration she had ever received. 11 weeks ago he was already building a plan to remove her from the board without telling her she was ever on it. She asked, what was the condition? Rios looked at his coffee. Rios. He wanted Varro married, Rio said quietly. Publicly. To a woman who was not you. On a specific date. In front of specific witnesses. A pause. It was the only move that would signal to this man's network that you were no longer an asset to acquire. So Emilio staged the entire wedding, she said. The whole thing. Yes. He let me stand at that altar. Yes. He let me believe. Yes. She stood up. Walked to the window. Pressed her forehead lightly against the glass. Below, the city was still moving. Still indifferent. She said, to the glass, who is she? The woman he married. Rios was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then, that is the part he needs to tell you himself. Why? Rio set his coffee down slowly. He looked at her with those 11-year eyes, eyes that had watched the Varro world from the inside long enough to know exactly where all the bodies were buried, and exactly which of them had not deserved to be there. He said, the most dangerous men in this world, Miss Blake, are not the ones who hurt people. They are the ones who love people, and already know exactly what that love is going to cost them. He let that sit in the room for a long moment. Then, get some rest. And he left. And she stood alone in that room with the third thing she had learned, the thing Rios had not said directly, but that she had read between his silences the way she had learned, in 6 months of loving Emilio Varro, to read everything. The woman from the cathedral. She had seen something at the altar she hadn't allowed herself to process. Something about the way the woman stood. The angle of her shoulders. The specific way she held her hands. She had filed it away. Now she pulled it back out. She stared at it. And she felt the floor shift under everything she thought she understood. Emilio came back at dawn. He looked like a man who had not slept. Which, for someone whose primary architecture was control, was the most revealing thing she had ever seen on him. He sat down. He looked at her. She said, I know about the condition. He didn't react. I know she left the country. Still nothing. I know you've known about the threat for 11 weeks. A breath. Small. Controlled. And I know, she said, that whatever the answer is to who she is. Rios believes it changes what I'm allowed to feel about all of this. He looked at his hands. Which was extraordinary. Because Emilio Varro did not look at his hands. He looked at you. He always looked at you. It was part of how he maintained the particular gravitational field he operated within. What did you feel, he said quietly, when you walked out of that cathedral? She considered lying. Like I had survived something I didn't know I was inside of. He nodded. Slowly. That's accurate. Emilio. Tell me who she is. He was quiet for a long time. The dawn light came through the window in a slow, reluctant way, like it too was hesitant about what the day would require of it. Then he said, "She is the only person in my world I trust completely. The only one who agreed, without hesitation, when I asked her to do this." "Why her specifically?" "Because she understands what it costs," he said. "She's been in this world long enough to know that sometimes the most brutal thing you can do is the only thing that keeps someone alive." Something moved in Serena's chest. "And she agreed to marry you, publicly, officially, legally, to protect a woman she had never met." He looked up. And in his eyes was something she had never seen there before. Something raw. Undefended. "No," he said. "Then why did she?" "Because it wasn't a stranger she agreed to protect." The room went completely still. "She knew me?" Serena said. Emilio held her gaze. He opened his mouth. And then his phone rang. He looked at it. Something shifted in his face, fast, sharp, decisive. He stood up. "Emilio. I have to go." "You were about to tell me." "I know." "Then tell me. Right now. Before you." He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. He turned back and looked at her one final time. He said, "The woman who married me today." A pause so long it had a physical weight. "Came back for you. Not for me." And then he was gone. And Serena Blake stood alone in that room at dawn with a half-sentence that unlocked a door she didn't know existed, and slammed every other door she thought she understood firmly, irreversibly shut. She came back. Back. She had been here before. She had been in Serena's life before. But where? But when? But who? She stood at that window for a long time after he left. The city below was waking up. Ordinary. Oblivious. She was not ordinary. She was not oblivious. She was standing in the wreckage of a story she thought she understood, and realizing, piece by shattered piece, that she had never been reading the right version. He didn't betray her at that altar. He performed a betrayal. For an audience of exactly one, a man she had never met, who had been watching her like a piece on a board she didn't know she had been placed on. Emilio had stood at that altar and publicly, legally, devastatingly removed her from the game. He had crushed her in public. To save her in private. And she hated that it made sense. She hated that it changed things. She hated that she was standing here at dawn in a safe house that hadn't existed in her world 24 hours ago, turning over the word "she came back for you" like a code she was 90% of the way to cracking. She knew one thing now that she hadn't known when she walked down that aisle. Emilio Varro had never once done a single thing without a reason. Not a smile. Not a look back. Not a wedding. Which meant every moment she had filed under love was also a move. And she still didn't know the name of the game. Or how many players were left. Was this love, or the most elaborate act of protection you have ever witnessed? Did he save her, or is the worst part still coming? Who is the woman that came back for Serena, and what does she know? Drop part 2 in the comments right now if you need the truth. Because what she discovers next will not just change everything she thinks about Emilio Varro. It will change everything she thinks about herself.